Welcome back to the channel. My name is Conor McMillen. It is great to have you here in my new YouTube studio. As you can see, things have changed a little bit. I am currently living in this beautiful van, and my family and I are planning a road trip coming up pretty soon. So this is where some videos will be recorded for a little while, and probably some outside in nature as well. So I hope that it works for you guys. I am really enjoying it quite a lot. And today I thought that it would be fun and maybe interesting to share my personal story on how I discovered IFS and the impact that it's had on my life. And I have told this story many times before in different venues and, of course, to different people. And I think it's always interesting to revisit these kind of big stories in our lives and tell them again, because they change based on where we are in life and our fresh perspective, which is always evolving, right? And so I don't quite know what I'm going to say, other than I know the general events of the story, of course. So this is more of a candid video. There might be some teaching moments in here, I don't know, but hopefully it can offer some insight onto me personally, and also potentially the positive impact that IFS can have. And so that's really what I'm excited to share about on this channel, is really to inspire people like yourself to go after the journey of self-discovery. And I think IFS is one of the easiest, most practical ways to both start that journey and to also aid in the development of that story over time. So I am 40 now. I'm going to be 41 in January. And when I was 28, I went through quite a big life change. I had been in a relationship since I was 16. So I was with the same woman when I was since 16 to 28. And we were doing pretty okay. But there was a lot of things that I just didn't know about relationship at that age. And there was a lot of things that she and I didn't talk about because we didn't know how to talk about these things. And so over time, our relationship just kind of, we slowly grew apart. And at some point, she made the decision to separate from me. And how my system was at that time was very, very enmeshed in attachment with her. And so it was an incredibly painful separation. And it was something I really didn't know how to actually care for at the time. So I had that going on. In addition to that, I had quite an addiction to alcohol, and I was drinking every day and quite a lot of alcohol. I was what you would call functional alcoholic, in that I was able to get up in the morning and work. I was running my own company at the time, doing, well, it was general kind of construction. This is in Massachusetts. General construction. I did all sorts of things. But during that time, I had gotten into foreclosure management. That's during the time when in the United States we had a lot of foreclosures. And so a lot of the contractors at that time had diverted work from building or renovating houses into managing and taking care of foreclosed homes. So I was working an absolute ton. And to be quite honest, I was not making very much money at all, but I was working a lot. So I was working pretty much every day, sometimes 12 hours a day, not making very much money, was drinking very heavily. I also was doing other drugs, specifically opiate-based drugs, Oxycontin, and binging on those kinds of drugs. I didn't use those every day, but I definitely had an addiction towards opiate-based drugs as well. So then this separation happened, and my whole external system got shifted, and my whole internal system got shifted. And I kind of just struggled through for a couple of months. And I remember having this moment where I sort of thought to myself, well, I can either keep doing what I'm doing or I can change everything. And so I decided on the latter. And like I said, I really didn't have the self-awareness like I have now. I didn't have the internal dialogue with my parts that I have now. I didn't really know how to care for myself. But I did know that if I didn't change everything, then it was going to be very hard to change one or two or three things. And I knew that I wanted to change my relationship with alcohol. I knew that I wanted to be a happy person. I knew that I wanted to somehow move through this separation, this breakup, in a way that would leave me better off than where I had been. And I didn't know how to do any of those things, but I knew that it was possible somehow. So within 7 days, I just kind of quit everything and I changed my diet. That was kind of the first thing that I attached to. I found a diet that appealed to me and I sort of went 100% into that. That's maybe for another YouTube video because that's a whole story of itself. But it helped in the sense that I had something to focus on and I had my attention on this diet. And through the diet, I also was focused more on general health. So within 7 days, at the time, I was smoking cigarettes as well. So I quit drinking caffeine, alcohol, cigarettes. I had already kind of stopped Oxycontin and other opiate-based pills that I was taking. But I just, I just really went all in and dove into what I had control over. And that worked really, really well for a while. I mean, it gave me focus, it gave me empowerment, it gave me better health, obviously, pretty much immediately. And so through that process, I actually started feeling more. And even though I was feeling much better in a certain way than I had in probably 10 years, I also was feeling a lot. And within the context of feeling good things a lot, there was also the context of feeling really challenging things a lot. And so there was this kind of still this confusion of what do I do with all of these feelings? So I was starting to investigate different healing modalities and reading different books and listening to different podcasts and this and that. And I just happened to stumble upon a podcast interviewing Richard Schwartz. As you probably know, he is the reason that IFS exists. So thank you, Richard. And I listened to this podcast. It was quite a long podcast. I think it was 2.5 hours long, where he was talking about parts, where the system is not just one singular thinking, feeling, sensing thing, but is actually a multiplicity system with subpersonalities, things that we call parts. And we can identify those parts as part of our internal family. And by simply tuning into that awareness, we begin to understand why it is that we are so complex. But through this perspective, it becomes less complex. It becomes less confusing because we're able to actually separate these subpersonalities from the system and kind of separate them, put one over here and put one over here and put one over here, and actually get to know each one of these parts in a way that I think it's too complex to try to understand your system when you have multiple parts that are very active all at once, that have totally different understanding and belief and perspective and desires, all with the baseline of wanting to help us out, right? But they have a different idea of how to do that based on different memories and beliefs that they hold. So trying to understand your system while all of these parts can be very active, as they were for me, I had a lot of parts that were very active all at once. It was just overwhelming. But hearing this podcast, like at the end of the podcast, I already felt a huge shift. I felt relaxation, and I felt grounded, and I felt like it was possible for me to better understand my system. And even just through listening to the 2.5 hour podcast, I had a better sense of what was going on for this part and this part and this part. There was a lot more for me to learn, but simply getting this new perspective, it basically changed my life. And so I think it was as early as the next day, I got onto what at that time I think was selfleadership.com or org or something. It's the original website that the IFS Institute had. And I bought every book that they had available. Again, this was about 11 years ago. There's a lot more content out there now than there was at that time. But I just bought everything that was available, and I started reading all of the books possible. I started listening to every podcast I could find on IFS and watching every YouTube video I could find. And again, there really was not that much content out there, but it was definitely enough for me to begin this self-led IFS therapy. And what I mean by that is I was doing IFS therapy on myself. This was also not something that I had heard about. I don't know if anyone had talked about it at that time, but it felt very intuitive, and it felt very clear that like this is what I want to do. This makes sense to me. And so I just started, I learned how to do all these different protocols and understanding the different parts of the system and how to connect with them. And I began doing my own drop-ins, which again, if you don't know what a drop-in is, for me, essentially, it was just closing my eyes, calling in different parts of my system, feeling in my body, feeling in my emotional world, noticing my thoughts, what's there, and beginning to engage with these different parts that were active with as much compassion and curiosity as I could. So I did that for, I'm not really sure, maybe 6 months or so. And then I was really curious about going further, getting deeper into IFS. And I looked at the IFS Institute's website, and I did see that they were offering trainings. And at the time, I looked at these trainings and I was like, there's no way that I'm going to get into a training. I'm coming from a background with a history major in the construction field. Why would they accept me? But I went through the application process anyway, and I think it was pretty soon I got an email that said I was accepted. And I was just so excited about it. I mean, I was so pumped. And the little caveat here is that the program at the time was something around $5,000, and I had in my bank account at that time like $5,200. And when they sent me the email that I had been accepted, there's also an invoice that you could pay. I didn't think about it at all. I just immediately paid the invoice and just felt so great about it. So that just goes to show like how enthusiastic I was. I just knew that the money was going to be worth it, and it really was. It really was. And I can't recall exactly how long it was between getting the email and then actually going to the training. Could have been a month, could have been 3 months. I don't really recall. So I went to this training. At the time I was in Massachusetts. I flew out to California. I want to say it was maybe in Santa Cruz or somewhere like that. And it was an intensive training. So I actually lived there with the other practitioners. And the funny thing about it was, I showed up. I was 28 at the time. I was I was really quite nervous. I wanted to do a great job. It was very clear to me when I arrived that everyone there was a licensed therapist. and some of them were psychologists, some of them were psychiatrists. Um, I think I was the youngest person there by probably, I don't know, a handful of years, but the median age was probably more like 40-year-olds, and I was 28. So that I felt, I stuck out for that reason. I was also the only non-licensed therapist that was there. I stuck out for that reason. And then I think I was one of, if I recall correctly, 3 men in total of a group of maybe 30, maybe 40 people. But I just put my best foot forward, and I dove in, and the training was absolutely amazing. We did it in 2 chunks, so we had one chunk all together, and then we all went home and we did some online stuff, and then we all came back and did another chunk. And essentially the training was, there'd be some amount of educational stuff on IFS that, to be quite honest, I already knew quite well because I had read all the books and I had done a lot of work on myself. And then it was just practice. And we would just sit in these groups of 3 where there would be 2 students and kind of an overseer of sorts, someone who had been through the training and or had been in the IFS Institute's kind of umbrella of practitioners for quite some time. And we would just practice IFS on each other. And it was amazing. And I found that I was really quite good at it right away. And I say that humbly, but also honestly, in that, I think all the practice I had done on myself, my personality, my desire to connect with people, it was just a great fit. And this was also something that, IFS aside, it just brought a lot of confidence and clarity into my life that I was really good at this thing. I felt really passionate about it. It had deeply impacted me on an individual level. This is something I want to do for the rest of my life. So yeah, the training was fantastic. I still have a lifelong friend from that training. We've done a lot of IFS practice together. She's incredible. Pretty much everyone I met at the training was amazing. I haven't stayed in contact with most of them. There's a couple of other people I'm kind of in contact with, but that was 11 years ago now. And I still think back on it as some of the best days of my life. I mean, some of the most empowering, educational, life-changing days of my life. And I'm incredibly grateful to the IFS Institute, incredibly grateful to Richard Schwartz. And unfortunately now you can't get in to these trainings unless you are a licensed therapist. I can understand why. I think they've been really inundated with a lot of new interest in the last 5 years in particular. So I get it. And I also feel like it's a bummer because there are people out there like me that I think could really make an incredible impact on the world if they were given the chance to have that same training. But I do understand it, both from a business perspective, and also I think that they want to make sure that practitioners that are saying that they were trained can kind of uphold a certain standard. So totally get it. Yeah, so then it's been well, I guess just to go back, I came back to Massachusetts after that, after the full training was done, and I decided to start working with clients. And initially, I just did it as a donation-based exchange, and I probably did that for about a year before I actually started charging. And I learned a lot, in that first year. But the beautiful thing about IFS is that as a practitioner, I think it's really, if you do it right, you generally can't possibly get into a situation that is going to be too much or too overwhelming. It's still possible, of course, it's still possible, But because IFS really encourages you go as slow as the slowest part, and if you are able to pay attention to the client and really notice, okay, something else is here and becoming active, and you don't have in your own mind, we have to get from point A to point B, we've got to go over here. And you can really just be present with the client and go through these protocols and slow everything down. It tends to be that the exchange is appropriate for the level of training, the level of experience that the practitioner has, because it's kind of self-regulating in that the client is really encouraged to go slow. And if there's a part that's active, maybe a part that's like, I don't trust you, the practitioner, that part is welcome to be there, and it's like the system can slow down enough to actually come forward and speak to that. Anyway, there was a lot of learning in the first year, and then I just kind of continued on developing my IFS practice. And a lot of that development has really been the learning that I have had with myself doing self-led IFS-based therapy. And it's also something, obviously, the name of the channel and the programs that I have, my encouragement is really for individuals to develop their own connection with IFS. And this is based on how impactful it was for me. I know that this works. I know that it's an incredibly effective and pretty easy to understand perspective and set of protocols for an individual to practice this on themselves. And then, of course, if you get stuck or you want more help, or you just feel like it would be nice to have a practitioner, totally get a practitioner. But, my encouragement always is to really take on that principle and that understanding of self-leadership, which appeals to me so much in the IFS model, that we are in charge of this system here, and we have the power to interact with it, to engage with it, to help it heal, to help it grow, to help it prosper. And it's really our responsibility to do that. And it may be the most self-responsible thing for you to get help doing that from someone else, right? That's an action of self-responsibility. And also, at the end of the day, you come home to you come home to this is where you live. And so it really behooves us, it really takes care of us to take the time to develop a connection with us, so that we can better understand our emotional world, the parts that are involved in it, and so that we can better understand how to bring safety and harmony and vulnerability into our system with ourselves. And I genuinely believe that that is possible for every human being, you included. Yeah, so as I said, this story, it's big and it has branches, and I'm not going to go off onto each pathway right this moment. But it feels good to share here on this channel and kind of, again, just let you know who I am, my background with IFS, my background as a human being, some of the struggles that I've had. By the way, I didn't really go into anxiety and depression, but that was also, that's been a huge part of my background in addition to addictive behavior. So that's kind of where I'm coming from. And it's also what IFS has helped me uncover and understand in such depth and with such compassion and such love, that all of those things have really, really shifted inside of my system. So again, much gratitude to the IFS Institute, to Richard Schwartz, to all those who've contributed to this incredible perspective on the human system. And I hope that I can also continue to contribute in my own way with my own perspective. And in that, appeal to the right people, because I do believe that, as educators, as teachers, even as practitioners, we don't align with everybody. And that's great. because we're going to align with the people who there's something here that makes sense to exchange. So here I am doing my part and loving it. As I said, if you don't know already, you can check out my complete self-led IFS program. It will help you kind of go through some of the things that I did on my own, but with a bit more guidance than I had when I was doing it. And it's really encouraging people like yourselves to step into that self-responsibility and that self-leadership that I know is possible for everyone. And if you want to check that out, internalfamilysystems.org. If you want to sign up for my newsletter, I give you a free IFS guided meditation, and I've gotten great feedback on both things. So much love to you. I hope you have a beautiful day. Very open and welcoming to your comments, and we will see you on the next one.